He walked into the club, his bright red MAGA hat instantly drawing snickers and side eyes. The DJ stopped the music, mocking him in front of the roaring crowd. What no one realized was that this man wasn't just another guest. He was the one who signed their paychecks. By the time the truth came out, the tables had turned in a way no one could have predicted. Let's start at the beginning. The neon-lit club thrived under the kaleidoscope of strobe lights, the heavy bass line vibrating through every corner of the packed room. Patrons, a mix of young professionals and nightlife regulars, danced with abandon, their faces illuminated in bursts of electric blue and crimson. The air was thick with the scent of spilled cocktails and a faint trace of smoke machines, creating an intoxicatingly chaotic atmosphere. From his elevated booth, DJ Chris "Pulse" Adams commanded the room. In his early 30s, with a wiry build, a backward cap, and oversized headphones hanging around his neck, he exuded a cocky swagger. His sharp features twisted into a mischievous grin as he scanned the pulsating crowd. The entrance doors swung open, and Jonathan Harris, a 55-year-old businessman, entered with measured confidence. His silver hair was neatly combed, contrasting sharply with the chaos around him. Dressed in a sleek black leather jacket, fitted dark jeans, and polished leather boots, Jonathan's presence exuded quiet authority. But it was the unmistakable red MAGA hat perched atop his head that seized the room's attention, its bold white letters gleaming under the flashing lights. Conversations at nearby tables hushed momentarily before giving way to muffled laughter and judgmental whispers. Chris, spotting the hat, seized his moment. Grabbing the mic, he quipped, Well, looks like we've got a VIP tonight. A walking headline from 2016. Let's give him a round of applause, folks." A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd, with a few patrons clapping sarcastically. Jonathan, unfazed, glanced up at the DJ booth, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Chris with an unreadable expression. His faint smirk hinted at amusement rather than irritation. Making his way to the bar, Jonathan ordered a neat bourbon, his calm demeanor a striking contrast to the rowdy crowd. The bartender, a young woman with short pink hair and a skeptical glance at his hat, handed him the drink wordlessly. He raised his glass to her with a polite nod, before turning to observe the scene. Chris wasn't done. "Careful, everyone," he called into the mic, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Don't say anything too controversial. We wouldn't want to ruin anyone's evening." The crowd roared with laughter, several people glancing toward Jonathan, waiting for a reaction. Jonathan sipped his bourbon, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the room as if studying an exhibit. His silence only seemed to heighten the tension, leaving the DJ visibly annoyed by his unshakable calm. As the music resumed, the energy in the room shifted slightly. A few patrons began pulling out their phones, recording surreptitiously, as if sensing an unfolding drama. Jonathan remained at the bar, his presence an undeniable, silent counterpoint to the DJ's boisterous performance. The chapter ended with Chris upping the volume on a bass drop, casting a defiant smirk toward Jonathan, who merely raised his glass in a quiet, ironic toast. The crowd murmured with anticipation, wondering what would happen next in this unexpected clash of personalities. The music shifted seamlessly to an energetic beat, the kind that ignited the dance floor and kept the crowd moving. Chris "Pulse" Adams, perched confidently in his booth, seized the moment. Leaning into the mic, he smirked and announced, "This one's for anyone stuck in 2016. You know who you are." His eyes darted directly toward Jonathan, the red MAGA hat a clear target. Laughter rippled through the crowd, emboldening Chris. He added, "Let's hear it for our throwback mascot." More cheers erupted, along with scattered applause. Jonathan remained calm, sipping his bourbon. His face betrayed no anger, only the faintest hint of amusement as he observed the crowd's reaction. Nearby, a young couple in their 20s exchanged wide-eyed looks, one of them raising their phone to record the scene. "This is wild," the woman whispered, angling the camera toward Jonathan and the DJ booth. The bass drop reverberated across the room, and Jonathan, seemingly unfazed, stepped onto the dance floor. His movements were deliberate but unhurried, as though he were testing the waters of the pulsating crowd. Chris, noticing, immediately cut the music. A sharp silence descended over the club, broken only by the hum of machinery and confused murmurs from the crowd. Chris grabbed the mic again, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Sorry, folks," he announced, shrugging theatrically. "We can't have political distractions ruining the vibe. You understand, right?" The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some patrons jeered in agreement, their laughter echoing through the silence. Others looked confused, their brows furrowed as they turned to their companions. "Play the music!" someone shouted from the back of the room. Another voice chimed in, louder. "This isn't cool, man. Let him dance." Jonathan took a step forward, his polished leather boots clicking against the floor. His calm voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I didn't realize respect had gone out of style," he said, his tone even but laced with wry humor. The crowd quieted, his words drawing their attention like a magnet. Phones emerged from pockets, their cameras now aimed at the unfolding drama. Chris shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence faltering as he realized the crowd was no longer entirely on his side. He adjusted his headphones, tapping at the console as if pretending to work. Jonathan, still composed, turned to address the crowd, his piercing blue eyes sweeping the room. "Music is supposed to bring people together," he said with a faint smile, "not tear them apart." The murmurs grew louder, the crowd divided between those nodding in agreement and others exchanging uncertain glances. Chris leaned into the mic again, attempting to regain control. "Look, it's just a joke," he said, his voice carrying a nervous edge. "Don't take it so seriously." But the tone in the room had shifted. Jonathan's calm defiance had struck a chord, and the crowd's energy was no longer fully in Chris's favor. The air was thick with anticipation, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The chapter ended with Jonathan stepping back to his place near the bar, raising his glass in a silent toast to the crowd. The tension remained, palpable and unresolved, as Chris hesitated at his console, the once commanding DJ now visibly unsure of his next move. The tense silence was shattered by the sharp click of heels against the club's polished floor. Megan Carter, a poised woman in her late 40s, strode into the room with an air of authority. Dressed in an elegant black pantsuit, her tailored blazer accentuated her commanding presence. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and a clipboard in her hand bore the unmistakable logo of the event. "Chris!" she called, her firm voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The DJ flinched, his hand instinctively reaching for the volume knob, as if to hide behind it. "Yeah?" Chris replied, attempting nonchalance, though his earlier bravado had clearly diminished. Megan's piercing gaze locked onto him. "What's going on here?" Chris shrugged, offering a weak grin. "Just keeping things light. You know, making sure the vibe stays politics-free." The crowd, previously amused, now shifted uneasily. Megan's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of annoyance crossing her otherwise composed features. She turned to Jonathan, her demeanor softening instantly. "Mr. Harris?" Megan said warmly, her voice now carrying a note of respect. "I'm so sorry about this. I had no idea you'd arrived already." The room froze. Conversations halted, and all eyes snapped toward Jonathan. The weight of Megan's words began to sink in. Jonathan tilted his head slightly, his signature calm smile still firmly in place. "No harm done, Megan," he replied smoothly. Then, with a wry tilt of his voice, he added, "Though I must admit, it's quite an unconventional welcome to my own event." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The realization hit like a wave, and the energy in the room shifted dramatically. Chris's face drained of color, his earlier smirk replaced by wide-eyed panic. "Your event?" he stammered, his voice barely audible over the rising whispers. Jonathan nodded, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Chris with quiet amusement. "That's right," he said, his tone even but firm. "Tonight's party was my idea, my planning, and my funding." The crowd erupted in whispers, the air thick with shock and anticipation. Phones appeared as if on cue, recording Chris's increasingly ashen expression. I didn't know," Chris muttered, his bravado crumbling into sheer mortification. Jonathan's faint smile widened just enough to be noticeable. "Well," he said lightly, "I imagine this is one night you won't forget." The crowd chuckled, the tension giving way to a mix of relief and humor. Megan stepped closer to Chris, her clipboard now clutched firmly against her chest. "We'll discuss this later," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. As Chris slumped slightly, trying to shrink behind his DJ equipment, Jonathan turned to the crowd. "Now," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the murmur of voices. "How about we get back to the music?" The room erupted into cheers and applause, the energy shifting back to excitement. Jonathan raised his glass in a toast, his calm authority effortlessly reclaiming the night. Chris, now visibly shaken, fumbled to restart the music. The first beats of a lively track filled the room, and the crowd quickly swarmed the dance floor. Jonathan leaned casually against the bar, his confident smile lingering as the cameras captured every moment. The chapter ended with Megan whispering something sharply to Chris, her expression stern, while Jonathan sipped his drink, the undisputed master of the room. The room buzzed with a mix of excitement and awkward tension as Megan stepped forward, her sharp black heels clicking against the polished floor. Taking the microphone from Chris's booth, she addressed the crowd with effortless poise. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and authoritative, "it seems a reintroduction is in order. Mr. Jonathan Harris is not only tonight's event organizer, but also one of the primary benefactors of this venue. His vision and generosity are why we're all here enjoying this fantastic night." Applause erupted, punctuated by cheers from several patrons. Some even called out, "Harris! Harris!" as Jonathan raised his glass in acknowledgement, his calm smile never wavering. Megan turned back to Chris, who now stood frozen in his booth, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead under the neon lights. With a pointed gesture, she beckoned him to step down. Chris hesitated, his earlier smugness replaced by visible anxiety. Slowly, he descended from the elevated booth, his oversized headphones dangling awkwardly around his neck. The crowd watched intently, their phones capturing every second. Jonathan met Chris halfway, his polished leather shoes clicking softly against the floor as he approached. Despite the growing silence, his demeanor remained effortlessly composed. "Chris," Jonathan said, his voice carrying a measured calm that demanded attention. "Respect for others is the foundation of any good party." His faint smile hinted at both wisdom and subtle irony. "Do you think you can spin that lesson into your next set?" Chris nodded vigorously, his cheeks flushing red. "Absolutely," he stammered, his usual bravado completely stripped away. I apologize for my behavior. It was uncalled for." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause once more, some shouting playful encouragement like, "Way to own it!" and "Spin it right, Chris." Jonathan patted Chris on the shoulder, his gesture both forgiving and authoritative. "Good," he said with a nod. "Now let's keep the energy up. The night's still young." With that, Jonathan turned back to the crowd, raising his glass once again. "Music, Chris," he called out, his voice brimming with quiet confidence. Chris scrambled back to his booth, fumbling slightly as he adjusted his equipment. The crowd roared in approval as the first beats of a vibrant track filled the room, the bass pulsating through the air. Cheers and laughter swept across the dance floor, the earlier tension dissolving into pure celebration. Jonathan leaned casually against the bar, his presence commanding respect without effort. Megan joined him briefly, her clipboard tucked under one arm. "Handled with grace, as always," she said with a wry smile. By sunrise, social media was buzzing with clips from the previous night. Headlines blared. DJ mocks MAGA hat, finds out it's the host's party, and respect served with a beat. Jonathan Harris shines at his own event. The videos, shared across platforms, racked up millions of views, sparking debates and admiration alike. Comments ranged from, "This is how you handle disrespect with class," to, "That DJ needed a reality check, and boy did he get it." Back at the club that evening, the atmosphere was lighter, but charged with anticipation. The staff exchanged knowing looks as Chris nervously approached Jonathan in the VIP section. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a humble demeanor. "Mr. Harris," Chris began, his voice steady but tinged with regret. He wore a crisp black shirt and jeans, a departure from his usual flashy style. "I just want to thank you for giving me a second chance. Last night was a lesson I won't forget." Jonathan, seated with his legs crossed and a glass of whiskey in hand, met Chris's gaze with his trademark calm. His silver hair glinted under the dim lights, and his red MAGA hat rested confidently atop his head. "Growth comes from owning your mistakes," he replied, his tone warm yet firm. Extending his hand, he added, "Let's make tonight a better story. For everyone." Chris nodded, relief washing over his face as he shook Jonathan's hand. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "You won't regret it." The night unfolded with renewed energy. Chris took to the turntables with a focused determination, blending tracks seamlessly and hyping the crowd without a hint of the previous night's arrogance. The dance floor pulsed with life, patrons cheering and laughing as they let loose to the beat. Above the DJ booth, a new banner hung prominently, its bold letters illuminated by soft neon lights. "Respect, the rhythm of a great party." Megan, overseeing the event from a distance, glanced at Jonathan with a nod of approval. Jonathan chuckled softly as he noticed the banner, adjusting his MAGA hat with a faint smile. Leaning back in his seat, he sipped his drink and observed the crowd, a mix of familiar faces and newcomers, united in celebration. As the night reached its peak, Chris took the mic. "Let's hear it for the man who made this all possible," he announced, pointing toward Jonathan. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing through the club. Jonathan raised his glass in acknowledgement, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. Near the exit, a young couple filmed the scene on their phone, whispering to each other. "This guy's a legend," one said, grinning. "I mean, who handles disrespect like that and turns it into a teachable moment?" The chapter closed with Jonathan stepping onto the dance floor, his polished leather shoes catching the light as he joined the crowd. Around him, laughter and music blended seamlessly, the club a living testament to the night's lesson. Behind the turntables, Chris spun with newfound purpose, his movements sharper, his energy infectious. Above it all, the banner glowed brightly, a reminder to everyone that respect truly was the rhythm of a great party.